In 2012, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Maryland, Maria Jenkins seemed to live a picture-perfect life. She was the devoted wife, the dedicated mother, and the woman who always put her family first. Her life with Richard, her husband, was admired by many. From the outside, it looked flawless, a model of happiness. No one could tell that beneath the surface, Maria was silently enduring the devastating weight of betrayal. Maria was the kind of woman who always smiled while dropping her kids off at school, who was present at every PTA meeting, and who hosted the perfect family dinners every weekend. Richard, a successful businessman, was the charming, attentive husband, always quick with a joke and a warm embrace. Together, they were the couple others envied. But behind closed doors, Maria's heart was breaking. It started a year ago, with a vague uneasiness she couldn't quite put into words. Richard began coming home later than usual. The excuses were reasonable at first: late-night meetings, business trips that extended by a day or two. Yet, Maria noticed small changes. He seemed distracted at times, less interested in the little things that used to make their marriage strong, like their nightly conversations, or the way he'd always hold her hand while they watched television. Then came the phone calls. The whispers. The hurried messages. Every time Richard's phone buzzed with a text, Maria could see a flicker of guilt in his eyes, even if he tried to hide it. But she dismissed her suspicions, refusing to confront the nagging doubt gnawing at her. She didn't want to admit that something might be wrong. She couldn't bear the thought of her perfect world collapsing. One evening, after tucking her children into bed, Maria finally decided to look through Richard's phone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through his messages, knowing deep down that what she would find might destroy her. And there it was, an exchange with a woman named Isabel. The messages were filled with flirtation, suggestive comments, and promises to meet up. Isabel wasn't just another colleague, she was Richard's affair. Maria's world crumbled in that moment. She sat alone in the darkened living room, the phone clutched tightly in her hands. Every memory of her marriage felt like a lie. How long had this been going on? How many times had he lied to her face, kissed her goodbye, and then rushed off to be with another woman? The anger that followed was intense, but so was the sadness. Maria didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to confront him right away, to scream, to demand answers. But another part of her, the part that had been taught to keep everything together, told her to stay calm, to think before she acted. She needed time to process this, to decide what to do next. Her children, their home, her whole life was at stake. As the days passed, Maria found herself slipping into a routine of pretending. She pretended everything was normal, that she was still the happy wife and mother everyone thought she was. But every time Richard walked through the door, her heart would race with a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion. She couldn't help but feel trapped, caught between the need to preserve her family and the overwhelming desire to tear everything apart. She started following Richard. Subtly at first. Checking his work calendar, noting the nights he claimed to be working late. She began driving past his office, then following him when he left. And soon enough, her suspicions were confirmed. Richard was not only meeting Isabel, he was seeing her regularly, in the middle of the day, in the very city where their family lived. The betrayal stung deeply. It wasn't just about another woman. It was about the lies, the deception, the way Richard had been living two lives right under Maria's nose. Each day, she gathered more and more evidence, building a case in her mind. She took photos, kept notes, and documented every suspicious action. She knew she couldn't confront him until she had everything, every detail of his betrayal. Maria's patience was running thin. The perfect life she had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and she was no longer the passive wife standing in the shadows. She was ready to take control, to turn the tables. And in the back of her mind, a plan began to form. If Richard thought he could deceive her, he was about to learn just how far she was willing to go to protect herself, and her children. Maria's facade of calm was becoming harder to maintain. Every day, she watched Richard live his life as if nothing had changed, as if he still had her trust. The lies, the pretending, it ate at her from the inside out. The worst part was the children. They adored their father, blissfully unaware of the secrets he kept. Maria knew she couldn't let this continue forever. But how and when to act? That was the question that haunted her every night. As days passed, Maria grew more meticulous. She continued to follow Richard, discreetly gathering evidence. She started logging every call, every trip, and every meeting. Her initial shock had now turned into something colder and more calculating. The pain of betrayal didn't fade, but it transformed into determination. If this was going to end, it was going to end on her terms. One particular Thursday afternoon, Maria found herself parked outside a cafe where Richard had told her he was meeting a client. She watched from her car, hidden behind a pair of large sunglasses, as Richard strolled inside, all smiles. 10 minutes later, a woman joined him. Isabel. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she grabbed her camera and began snapping pictures. Every glance, every gesture between them was documented. They laughed together, leaning in close like a couple lost in their own world. The intimacy between them was undeniable. Watching it in real time was like a knife twisting in Maria's gut, but she forced herself to remain still, quiet, and focused. This wasn't just about catching Richard in the act anymore. This was about control. As she drove away from the cafe, her mind raced. She had enough evidence now. The photos, the messages, the suspicious meetings, it was all there. She could confront him, destroy the illusion he had built. But something held her back. Maria didn't just want a confrontation. She wanted justice. And more than that, she wanted to make sure Richard could never hurt her or her children again. Over the next few weeks, Maria began making preparations. She met with a lawyer, discussing the details of a possible divorce. But divorce alone wasn't enough. Maria knew Richard had always been a step ahead, hiding assets, making sure he would walk away from any situation untouched. She wasn't about to let that happen. So, she dug deeper into his life. She hacked into his emails, rifled through his financial records, and discovered that Richard had been siphoning money into a secret bank account for months, perhaps even years. This money, Maria realized, wasn't just for Isabel. Richard was preparing for something larger, something that didn't include her or their family. He had been planning to leave her all along. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just an affair. Richard had been carefully crafting an exit strategy, one that would leave Maria blindsided and possibly destitute. Her blood boiled. She had to act now. Maria's plan began to take shape. She knew she had to be strategic, not just for herself, but for her children. If Richard thought he could just disappear and leave her behind with nothing, he was gravely mistaken. She wouldn't just expose him, she'd make sure he paid for every lie, every betrayal, and every plan he had made behind her back. Her first step was subtle, but crucial. She started slowly siphoning money from their joint accounts, transferring small amounts into a separate account under her name. The amounts were insignificant at first, enough to avoid suspicion. Richard never checked their finances too closely, trusting that Maria, the perfect wife, would continue managing everything as she always had. That was his first mistake. Next, Maria started gathering her allies. She reached out to a private investigator, someone who could help her track Richard's every move without raising any red flags. She didn't just want evidence of the affair anymore. She wanted proof of his financial deceit, his hidden accounts, his long-term plan to abandon his family. The more she uncovered, the more determined she became to dismantle everything Richard had built for himself. The investigator, a man named Samuel Harris, was efficient and discreet. Within a week, he had gathered detailed information on Richard's secret accounts, his meetings with Isabel, and even a potential plan to move out of state under false pretenses. Richard had been planning to take off without a trace, leaving Maria and the children behind while he started a new life with Isabel. It was worse than she had imagined. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Maria met Samuel in a dimly lit diner. He handed her a thick file filled with documents, photos, and detailed reports of Richard's activities. "You were right," Samuel said, his voice low. "He's been planning this for a while. I'd say he was getting ready to disappear in the next couple of months." Maria opened the file and leafed through the pages. Her hands trembled slightly as she took in the depth of Richard's betrayal. Secret apartments, offshore accounts, flights booked in advance. He had been methodical, careful, and ruthless. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You could confront him. Take this to court, expose him for what he is." Maria shook her head. "No, that's not enough." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning, Maria?" She didn't answer immediately. She had been thinking about it for weeks now, formulating her plan. Confronting Richard would be too simple. He would lie, twist the truth, make excuses. No, Maria needed something more decisive. Something final. "I'm going to ruin him," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Not just expose him. I'm going to take everything from him, just like he tried to take everything from me." Samuel didn't argue. He could see the resolve in her eyes, the determination that had been brewing ever since she first discovered the affair. Maria wasn't the same woman who had sat in her living room, devastated by the betrayal. She had changed. She was no longer playing the role of the perfect wife. Now, she was playing the role of a woman on a mission, and nothing was going to stop her. As she drove home that night, Maria knew there was no turning back. The unraveling had begun. And by the time she was finished, Richard wouldn't know what hit him. Maria returned home that night with a renewed sense of purpose. She had made her decision, there would be no confrontation, no tears, and no pleading for explanations. Richard had made his choices, and now, Maria would make hers. The pieces of her plan were starting to fall into place, but she knew the next steps would require careful precision. If Richard suspected anything, everything she'd worked for could crumble in an instant. The next morning, Maria carried on as usual. She made breakfast, sent the kids off to school, and kissed Richard goodbye as he left for work. The mask of the perfect wife and mother stayed firmly in place, even though underneath, she was calculating every move. The evidence she'd gathered with Samuel's help was safely locked away, waiting for the right moment. But Maria knew that simply exposing Richard's affair wouldn't be enough. She needed him to fall into a trap, one he couldn't escape from. Her first step was to solidify her financial position. Over the next few weeks, Maria continued to discreetly move money into her private account. She also began shifting assets that Richard didn't know about, a small inheritance from her mother, investments she had made early in their marriage. Richard had always assumed Maria was financially dependent on him, but he was wrong. She had quietly built a safety net for herself, and now it was time to put it to use. Maria also made a subtle but significant change. She stopped asking Richard questions. She no longer asked where he was going or when he would be home. She didn't mention the late nights or the missed dinners. Instead, she acted as though she didn't care, as though she was completely oblivious to his lies. This had a curious effect on Richard. He became more confident, more careless. He believed that Maria had grown indifferent, and in his arrogance, he let his guard down. One Friday evening, Richard announced that he would be going away on a business trip for the weekend. Maria already knew the truth. He was taking Isabel to a remote cabin in the mountains. She had the details, thanks to Samuel, who had been tracking Richard's every move. But Maria didn't react. She simply smiled, wished him a safe trip, and told him she'd spend the weekend with the kids. Richard left that night, and Maria's heart raced as she watched him drive away. She knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. With Richard out of the house, she had free rein to finalize her plan. That weekend, Maria took a series of calculated steps. She hired another lawyer, this time one specialized in high-stakes divorces. She laid out everything: the affair, the financial deception, the hidden assets. The lawyer assured her that they had a strong case, and that when the time came, Richard would be left with nothing. But that wasn't enough for Maria. She didn't just want to leave him, she wanted him to feel the weight of his own betrayal. The key to Maria's plan was timing. She needed to strike when Richard was at his most vulnerable, when he least expected it. So, she set the final stage of her trap. Using the information Samuel had gathered, Maria uncovered a series of illegal financial transactions Richard had been involved in through his company. It was risky, but it was exactly what she needed to ensure that Richard's downfall would be complete. The next move was to let Richard dig his own grave. Maria waited until he returned from his weekend getaway. She watched as he waltzed back into the house, pretending to be the devoted husband. He kissed her cheek and asked about her weekend, as if everything were perfectly normal. Maria played along, smiling and pretending that nothing had changed. She didn't confront him about Isabel, didn't mention the photos or the evidence she had. She simply let him believe that he was still in control. As the days passed, Richard fell deeper into his own web of lies. He started spending more time away from home, believing that Maria had grown so distant that she no longer cared. He didn't realize that Maria was setting him up for a fall. She let him take more risks, let him feel safe in his deceit. And all the while, she was carefully orchestrating his downfall behind the scenes. Then came the day Maria had been waiting for, the day she would pull the trigger on her plan. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and Richard was once again preparing for another weekend business trip. This time, Maria didn't just let him leave without a word. She smiled warmly as she handed him a packed suitcase, one she had prepared herself. Richard looked surprised but pleased, accepting the gesture as a sign that maybe things were returning to normal. Little did he know, that suitcase contained more than just his clothes. After Richard left, Maria made her final preparations. She contacted her lawyer, finalized the divorce papers, and sent copies of all the evidence she had gathered to the authorities. She had made sure to include the documents proving Richard's involvement in illegal financial transactions. That was the final nail in the coffin. That evening, Maria received a phone call. It was Samuel. "It's done," he said simply. "He's been arrested." Maria felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction wash over her. Richard had been pulled over by the police on his way to the cabin, his suitcase searched, and the incriminating documents found inside. The authorities had enough to charge him with multiple counts of financial fraud, not to mention the impending divorce that would leave him with nothing. For years, Richard had believed that he could live two lives, one as the perfect husband, and one as the deceitful man who betrayed his family. But now, those lives had collided in the most spectacular way. Maria had been patient, meticulous, and strategic. She had let him believe that he was in control, only to pull the rug out from under him when he least expected it. As she hung up the phone, Maria looked out the window at the setting sun. Her perfect life, the one she had fought so hard to protect, was gone. But in its place, she had something better: freedom. Freedom from the lies, the deception, and the man who had tried to destroy her. And for the first time in a long time, Maria felt at peace. She had won. The fallout from Richard's arrest was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, the news of his financial crimes had spread through the town like wildfire. His company, once regarded as one of the most stable and reputable in the area, was now embroiled in a scandal that threatened to take it down entirely. Colleagues, friends, and even distant acquaintances were shocked by the revelation, but no one was more surprised than Richard himself. He had never seen it coming. As Maria sat in her living room, watching the news coverage, she felt a strange sense of detachment. She had once feared this moment, feared the destruction of her family, her marriage, her life. But now, watching the world react to Richard's downfall, she felt only relief. The man who had deceived her, who had planned to abandon her and their children, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. And she no longer felt the need to mourn the life she had lost. The weeks following Richard's arrest were chaotic. Lawyers, reporters, and even the police were constantly contacting Maria, seeking statements, interviews, or details about her involvement. Maria, however, remained calm and focused. She had anticipated this attention and had prepared accordingly. Her lawyer handled most of the inquiries, ensuring that she was protected from any legal fallout. The evidence she had gathered not only proved Richard's infidelity but also cleared her of any involvement in his financial crimes. Meanwhile, Richard sat in jail, awaiting trial. His attempts to contact Maria were fruitless. Every letter he sent was returned unopened. Every phone call was ignored. Maria had made it clear, there would be no reconciliation, no conversation, no explanation. The moment Richard had decided to betray her, he had forfeited any chance of redemption in her eyes. The divorce was finalized within weeks. Thanks to the evidence Maria had meticulously gathered, the settlement heavily favored her. She received full custody of the children, the family home, and a significant portion of Richard's remaining assets. His hidden accounts, now frozen by the authorities, would likely be seized to repay the victims of his financial schemes. Maria had taken everything from him, just as she had planned. But despite the victory, the real challenge for Maria lay ahead: rebuilding her life. The perfect suburban image she had clung to for so long was gone, shattered by the reality of Richard's betrayal. Her neighbors, once friendly and supportive, now kept their distance, unsure of how to interact with her after everything that had happened. Some whispered behind her back, speculating about how much she had known about Richard's crimes. Others treated her with pity, as if she were a victim of circumstances beyond her control. But Maria didn't care about their opinions anymore. She had already lived through the worst, and she had come out stronger. Maria's focus shifted to her children. They were confused, hurt, and angry. They missed their father, and they didn't understand why he wasn't coming home. Maria had tried to shield them from the details of Richard's crimes, but as the media frenzy grew, it became harder to keep the truth from them. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, her son, Luke, asked the question she had been dreading. "Mom, why did Dad do those bad things?" Maria took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes," she began slowly, "people make choices that hurt others. Your dad made some bad choices, but that doesn't mean he didn't love you." Luke's eyes filled with tears. But why didn't he stay with us? Why did he lie? Maria's heart broke for her children. No matter how much she had prepared herself, nothing could make this conversation easier. I don't know why, sweetheart. But what I do know is that I will always be here for you. We're going to be okay. Her daughter, Emma, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. Are we going to see him again? Maria hesitated. She had promised herself that she wouldn't keep the children from their father, but the thought of them visiting Richard in jail made her stomach turn. I don't know, she said softly. We'll figure it out together. Over the next few months, Maria focused on rebuilding stability for her family. She found solace in the small moments, cooking breakfast with the kids, taking them to school, reading bedtime stories. The routine brought a sense of normalcy back into their lives, something they all desperately needed. The children gradually adapted to their new reality, and though they still asked about their father, the questions became less frequent. Maria also began to rediscover herself. For years, she had defined her identity by her role as a wife and mother, always putting her family's needs before her own. But now, she realized she had an opportunity to carve out a new path for herself. She took up old hobbies, like painting and gardening, things she had abandoned in the busy years of raising a family. She even started a part-time job at a local art gallery, something she had always dreamed of doing but never had the chance to pursue. As time passed, Maria started to feel a sense of liberation. She was no longer bound by the expectations of the perfect suburban life. She didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to keep up appearances for the sake of her marriage. For the first time in years, she was free to live for herself. One crisp autumn afternoon, Maria sat in her backyard, watching her children play in the leaves. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Maria felt truly at peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. Richard's trial was looming on the horizon, and though the thought of seeing him again filled her with a mix of anger and sadness, Maria knew that she had already won the most important battle. She had taken control of her life, reclaimed her sense of self, and protected her children from the worst of the storm. In the end, Maria realized that the perfect life she had once dreamed of wasn't real. It was a fragile illusion, built on lies and deception. But now, with everything out in the open, she had the chance to build something better, something real. And that, she thought as she watched her children laugh and play, was more valuable than any illusion of perfection. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of distant laughter. Maria closed her eyes and smiled. She was free. Finally, truly free.